Brilliant, we're back. Wonderful. So the next common gap I often see is one of the hardest things to get right in all of development. And it's ubiquitous across any language. It doesn't matter if it's JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, Scala, any of these languages. You have an opportunity to name a lot. Variables, functions, components. You get them wrong and your React app becomes unreadable chaos. So the most common things I see is unclear function names of abbreviations. Calc, prick, or PRC, it's not clear. They've used abbreviations. You have to sometimes have a domain knowledge in order to understand. If I gave a 3-letter acronym because I understand the airline industry, for example, and a junior walks in the next day and looks at that abbreviation, they have no idea. They have to then learn the domain knowledge in order to read the code, which is stressful, it's really hard, and it hurts the developer experience. Another thing I see very often is generic variable names, like data or value. Data is everywhere in applications. We're passing data through our components. Data doesn't tell you anything about what's actually inside of that function or that variable name. And then I also see single letter names in handlers. So you'll see an E denoting event in this case, but I see it across where if you are doing leak code problems, you will find that the fastest solutions are the ones that use single letter names, but we aren't doing that in React. React is a high level language, and because of that, it has a lot of syntactic sugar, and the goal of it is not to be the fastest. The goal is to enhance maintainability and readability, which is why when I come on to declarative versus imperative programming, you'll see the differences in readability, and the trade-off is that if you wanted a faster language, you would use a lower level language like C++, C#, where you're managing the memory yourself and you're able to get a lot more performance out of your applications. When you're writing JavaScript, you're not writing that. You're writing a high level language, and your job is to create simplicity and reduce complexity in your applications, whilst also being really, really clear about what everything is. So your developer experience is also better as a result of that. So if I was going to give you some principles, aim for clear names that require no guesswork. If you wouldn't want to come and refactor this code at 3 AM, you shouldn't be writing it in the first place. Specific names reveal intent instantaneously and completely. We want full names where we understand if we fetch the user profile, the variable name is user profile. It says exactly what it is on the tin. And if you're actually naming you're taking those single letter values that you might have used and actually using a proper name, it takes no cognitive load to figure out based on the context what that thing is. I like to call it in my team aggressively obvious naming. As I said, eliminating guesswork, and everything should read like documentation. And one of the best tools I found very early in my career was a code spell checker. When I catch people that haven't spell checked their work or haven't made sure that they've in essence crossed their T's and dotted their I's, it makes them seem like they haven't got an attention to detail. It makes me think they haven't cared enough to proofread their own work. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they truly do care. Sometimes you're trying to get a feature out. Sometimes you've got a product manager or a project manager that's pushing you to do things faster. This makes it so much easier by eliminating that for you. So naming prefixes. In a React application, there is a shared understanding, a shared vocabulary of how we can name things. So it eliminates the guesswork even more for us. Inside of a function, inside of a component, we use the word handle to denote internal event handlers. So anything that happens inside of your component is a handle function. The moment you pass it into another component or to another function, a function then becomes a callback, which you're calling back through the tree to action that function. Fetch, async data retrieval. So the fetch word tells me that you're fetching data from somewhere. It's very easy if you name your function fetch, whatever it is, very specific, long descriptive variable name. It's very easy for me to understand what that is doing. Fetch tells me API calls happening. Get is another good word where you're actually computing some values or you're deriving some values. In this case, you get the full name and you join the user first name and last name. And that means I can understand that this is a function that was going to transform data and it's going to give it back to me. Some more key terms, which is the use, which is a very much reserved keyword. You only want to be using the use keyword when you are creating your own custom hooks. It's a reserved word within the React ecosystem when you're building React apps. Set, again, you really shouldn't be using set outside of your use state setup. That it's coming from use state. If someone's created a function that is part of the use state, that's going to confuse me. It's going to confuse people that are working on your application. So I see a comment for Jack. I'm used to reviewing commenting functions with brief descriptions to make it easier to read. So is that not good practice? That's a great question. So there is a lot of, so there's two schools of thought on this. My school of thought, which is always what I've been trained to do, which is if your variable names and your function names are clear and you should not need comment to denote what it is. Now, with AI writing and generating a lot of the code for us, it is very happy to write comments. And sometimes those comments help. But what we're trying to do is make our code more readable. So we have to we reduce the need for comments because comments become stale. They can easily become stale when the code changes, where does the comment change? Now, there's a caveat to this. So there's another side to this, which is JS docs. If you're providing documentation where you say you give a bit of information about the inputs and the outputs, that's where a JS comment can be really helpful. But a lot of the time where yes, I can definitely share the PowerPoint. Let me share the PowerPoint. I'm seeing that. Scripts, which is what you would use if you were using a modern enterprise level application. Those types actually document a lot of what you'd get from a JS doc. So it kind of eliminates the need for a JS doc. I'm not opposed to comments. I just think you should make your code more readable, and then your comments don't need to be there, which means you have less to maintain, simpler, and it's less for a person to digest. Thank you, Jack. Wonderful. Let's get back to it. So consistency in naming across a React application, as I said, like as we have names and variables that we're defining, we want to make sure that we have a consistency across the app. This is why having a long descriptive variable name actually helps you, because then there's not going to be as many clashes, because it should be, this is the very clear name for the thing that we have. So I will sometimes see some people, I meant it's big for everyone, reassigning values halfway through. We definitely never want to do this. If you name things correctly on the first time, you never have to change it. And also it's confusing. Like if we're doing a find all and replace and you've changed the name of something, it's going to make it even more confusing. So we want to preserve name flow as much as possible. And also when we're passing data down into props, we want a consistent name. This is why naming is so important. If you're passing in the user object and it's now calling it profile info, we don't know, unless you've got TypeScript with the type as user, we don't know that that's a user type. So we have no understanding or shared understanding across data flow, in terms of data flow across the application. There's a caveat to this. So the naming convention of handle for internal event handlers within components, and the on keyword for denoting callbacks. This is how we understand whether we've got something that's where it's coming from. Is it coming from outside of the component, or is it coming from inside of the component? So you can see here in the example where we've got a couple of handle functions, and then we'll pass it into the on click from a button. Perfectly fine. Now, if you've got your own component and you're naming it, you want to maintain consistency, but when you pass handle function into another component, it becomes a callback. So it's better to have it as with on close and then passing your handle modal close function. It makes sense. And then when you're getting from props and you're pulling in the on close, you understand this is what I'm passing in for my modal. After it closes itself for its own handle function, I want to be calling on close, which will do something else in the page as well. So it's important to make sure that we name things consistently as a team and understand when a handle function gets passed in, it's now a callback. So we should name it as such.